our wisdom. So that replaces the section on sources. Inclusion is pretty much similar language, again, with a couple very telling changes. One is, instead of saying that we welcome all persons, it says we welcome all persons who share our values. And that's something to think about as to what that means. We're parameterizing this notion of radical hospitality. All are welcome here. And we're sort of saying all are welcome here if they belong. And then they add the phrase at the end, we commit to an association of congregations, empowers and enhances everyone's participation, adding especially those with historically marginalized identities. The final section is freedom of belief, which again, although it's in simpler language, I think is pretty much the same as what preceded it, saying congregational freedom and the individual's right of conscience are central to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. The congregations may establish statements of purpose, covenants, and bonds of union as long as they do not require that the members adhere to a creed. So again, that's both enforcing our non-creedalism and the freedom of belief. And I think I will stop. No, I had a few things to say. Some of you loved our 7 principles and felt that they are what drew you into Unitarian Universalism and wonder if you could accept our letting them go. Others felt that the principles were stilted assertions that sort of smacked of becoming a new creed, and they're eager to move on. And I'm still working to absorb the changes. I am impressed at the improvements made between November and January, because of the number of the edits really did improve the proposal. And there are a few things from the old principles that weren't carried forward and things I have to really ruminate on. The one that jumps out to me is that there's no mention to a commitment to seeking world peace or thinking globally. One could argue that it's sort of inferred from all the other things, but it's been such a strong commitment and it's nowhere in these new ideas. Others can see other things, and I'm sure that will happen. Well, what happens now? We read, we think, and between now and June, we can propose amendments to this. And I'm not quite sure how that process works logistically, but congregationally supplied amendments can be considered for a certain period of time. It's not too long. But then this thing will be pulled together and reified. And there will be a vote at the General Assembly this summer, which is in Pittsburgh in June, that determines whether the final version, as amended by then, whether it should be put forward as a recommended change to the denomination. This requires a majority vote to continue the process of considering the work of the Article 2 Study Commission. Then, after another year of discussion, we vote at General Assembly in 2024 whether or not to accept it and adopt it as a change to our bylaws. That would require 3/4 of all votes. Here in Beverly, we have the privilege of deciding whether this is important to us or not. We don't have to respond, and we will still be pretty much the same church as before. But if we care about how Unitarian Universalism defines itself, both to our members in the world, then this is coming up on the last possible time for us to weigh in on this discussion. Okay, I'll break now. In a moment, we will sing. We'll hear from Greg. We'll do the offering, and then I've got a few more thoughts, and then we'll let you go home. So, right now, If you can join us in singing hymn number 34, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire.
Two things I want to say it's important to realize is that the UUA is a covenant of congregations. It is not a covenant of members, of individuals. BUC, the congregation, is a member of the UUA. Individuals are not members of the UUA. And when the chair, Marcel, I can't remember his name, Marcel, was asked directly about what Unitarian Universalists refer to in the principles, he specifically said it means congregations, not people. We said it was ambiguous, but it sounded like people, and that was problemsome to some of us. I still think it's ambiguous, but that's okay. But now, I will say that when I was first joining a UU congregation in the early 90s, well, about 1990, I found the principles very reassuring. They were something that I say, if this is what you expect me to be to join a congregation, I'm happy with this. I wouldn't say they characterize UUism in any way, because many people essentially agree with everything there who never heard of UU or don't care to join a UU church. One important thing about congregations, which should be emphasized, and I don't think is that no one asked you to convert to become a Unitarian Universalist to join a congregation. I do not consider myself, if someone asks me my religious identity, I do not call myself a Unitarian Universalist. I am happy to say I'm a member of Beverly Unitarian Church, which is a member of the UUA, but that's a different thing. I'm going to skip, so now I'll go into my text. So I personally find it off-putting for people to talk of our UU faith or UU theology as if there's something in the faith theology realm that ties us together. That's not what ties us together. I gave a sermon during COVID time that's available on YouTube on my personal views of liberal religion and how that fits in with BUC, which I find a very good a congregation I like a lot. But I'm not going to discuss that today. I'll leave it to you. The UUA of 2023 is significantly different from that of 20 years earlier. Sufficiently different that it would make sense for congregations to take serious looks at the association to decide if they still want to belong. The UU world used to be a small niche world, but at least open to other viewpoints as far as I can tell. It is now a small niche world, different niche, that is not open to other viewpoints. By the way, the two niches are strong arguments against each other. They're camps, of which I belong to neither. There have been good intentions in much of the change in UUA. For example, it's valuable to listen to voices that have not been heard and to listen to people's experiences. As you may have noticed, I consider it very important to include many traditions in my musical selections. The hope is that this is a place that many people feel comfortable. We all learn from one another. But that does not mean that one has to stifle other voices, or you must accept everything that someone else says. I'm beginning to really resent people using phrases like centering other voices as an excuse to not confront ideas seriously. My involvement, so to speak, and I'm a UUA outsider. I'm an insider in the church, but I'm an outsider in UUA. My involvement, so to speak, started in 2019 when I started hearing things coming from UUA sources that would be considered racist if I said them in my world. This made me worry. In particular, phrases like logic and reason are a tool of white supremacy. If anyone cares, if you say to a mathematical audience that, they will first interpret that to mean that only whites are capable of logic and reason, for otherwise, how can it be a tool? It completely ignores the international nature of the scientific community, even in the US. There's also harm. While African Americans are still underrepresented, the both Asian American immigrant communities are as large, an ever-growing fraction of this group, and in fact, in many parts have become the majority. How do they hear this? There's also harm in such statements. One of the keys to opportunities in STEM professions is education at an early age. not just in math and science per se, but in logic, reason, and precise speaking. We fight stereotypes about who is good at math, whites, Asians, and these are perpetuated by the individual peer groups as well. We need strong statements that logic, reason, and science are exciting and not restricted to these groups. While I don't think people who made these statements were racist, I was surprised in the lack of worry about their statements when they came out, or any interest in retracting them. As I found out, these statements came out as a reaction to a book Reverend Todd Eckloff of Spokane presented at the General Assembly in Spokane in 2019. I have read the book. It is not great. It makes some interesting points. It has some things I disagree with. And I've been told, I haven't checked them directly, has several sloppy factual errors. However, it's the kind of book that I would expect to see at a national convention of an open-minded group allowing for many viewpoints. I don't want to go into the details, there's not time today, but effectively he was silenced, was forced to leave the meeting even though he was the minister of the host UUA congregation, and subsequently has lost his fellowship as a minister of the UUA. There was also a book by a member of UU congregation in Arizona, a political science professor, White Supremacy Culture, the Emergency of Neoliberal Left and Unitarian Universalism. If you follow UU World and UU websites, you may not know of these books. This is because the UUA is as censored as any religious group and does not allow freedom of expression. Arguing the major issues of the UU movement is not allowed there. However, you can find things like pseudoscience, such as the science of covenant, is allowed to be posted because it agrees with current trends. For this reason, I spent a lot of time in the last couple of years on Facebook groups dedicated to UU issues. Social media seems to be the only place to have open discussions. However, I've been shocked to see the way that supposedly good people who covenant in some sense the 7 principles act on these pages. By the way, people on both sides, not just one side. I can think of one UU minister who advertises as such on the minister's page and thinks that it's fine to call people racists and ask them to be removed from congregations, people who are definitely not racists. One must understand recent actions of the UUA in this light. There was a recent document called, ironically, Widening the Circle of Concern, that was prepared by a group of individuals on commission by the UUA board. They used a very skewed way of trying to poll opinions. I could discuss this later. I don't have time to discuss the problems with the document. It starts with a very good intention of hearing voices that perhaps have not heard the UU world before. That's great. But ends with the committee deciding what the future of UU should be. I submitted my survey to the committee, but no one like me is discussed in the report. Because I'm musical director of BUC, I'm on the UUA mailing list of congregation leaders. I received invitations to participate in focus groups on how to implement the proposal. When I told the UUA representative that I wanted to participate in a forum to explain why I think the report is more narrowing than widening, I was essentially ignored. This is the impression the UUA procedure appears to be now. The central body decides what is appropriate, and the roles of congregations are to implement it. The procedures behind the new version of Article 2 have some similarities. The committee was named by the board. As Alan hinted at, many of us think the board of the UUA is not a representative body in the usual sense. It uses standard majority rule techniques to prevent those with minority opinions to be represented on the board. While there are many focus groups for Article 2, one of which I participated in, I also participated in one on how to make GA inviting to people. They were heavily controlled by the facilitator, and all objections and comments that were made there did not appear in any public place. The UUA has prepared materials for congregations to consider the proposals, but are providing no mechanism or outlets for strong opposition voices to be heard. As we all know, part of the way to control democratic systems is to prevent or at least make it very difficult for opposition voices to be heard. UUA congregations have not been growing. There's currently a major dissenting group in the UUA forming an organization this year that you will not see represented in UU web pages. I would hope that most people in the congregation, I think most people in this congregation are like me. I don't mean exactly like me, but most of us are religious life is the congregation, and we actually respect each other and enjoy learning from each other. That's where we are. I fit with neither group in power in the UUA structure, and I think there's the growth in the UUA is in the congregation level, where you have more and more people who, like me until 2019, didn't really care what the UUA was doing. I said that the principles were an important part of what allowed someone like me to join a UUA congregation. It is unlikely I would ever have joined a congregation in UUA if the descriptive statement of the movement were like the proposed articles. There are various things in this. There's the lack of the importance of logic and reason. But there's also this excessive use of the word covenant. I could go into that more, how covenant has been changed on a top-down basis in the last 20 years. And I really find the phrase transformation. I'm going to quote one sentence. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Now, Alan said you have to look at this in the right viewpoint. I will say we should look at this in the viewpoint of someone who might be joining a congregation. We covenant to collectively transform. That is follow the leader. The word collectively is really a scary word. This is exactly what I would not join. To me, this is the antithesis of liberal religion. Having said my piece, I will now sit down.
Well, you can introduce the offer.
Is it time?
Now that you don't want to have anything to do with Unitarian Universalism, give us your money.
I will emphasize, and especially if you see my video, I have very strong opinions of Beverly Unitarian Church. And this is something we may all want to contribute to. And this is time for the offering for the contributions of the church. You can now read the words in the order of service. We are this church. We are its hands, its voice, its voice. Together we share the wealth of this community, and we sustain it with our gifts.
My piece here is fairly short, and the title is Overpromising. When I say naming the essence of Unitarian Universalism, I don't think I'm going to get there today. Okay, I introduced this proposal, and you heard Greg's response, and I really appreciate Greg getting up here and doing that. We do not see eye to eye on a lot of the issues in the UUA, but his voice and his insight and his opinion, I hold, is incredibly legitimate, and I definitely want to hear that all the time. I'm conflicted by this proposal. I'm attracted to broadening our expression of what we share to be a set of values, which I see as something far more generalizable than specific principles. In a way, it's moving from ideas to things that can support behavior and activity more directly. It's not that these values, anchored in love, are unique to UUs. Neither were most of the principles, as Greg pointed out. But to me, the values are bigger building blocks for us to refer to as we follow our aspirations for personal flourishing, for congregational vitality, and for denominational commitment. It's no secret that the current trend in the UUA is to lift up our role of social activism, especially in the realm of racial justice in America. The UUA as a body agreed to treat racial justice as deeply affected by our current culture of white supremacy. And our leadership has been attempting to accept the challenge to bring traditionally marginalized persons to the center of the UUA administration. And this commitment in language is reflected in the proposed amendment. And although it does not dominate it, it's a big part of the final product. I will also say that the UUA does a little bit too much in my mind of glad handling criticism. I agree that Greg has had trouble speaking his voice in sectors where it might be heard, and that is a problem, and it's something we need to work on. It's hard to know that when you're a large organization, if you want to put your conflicts out front or your agreements out front, but somehow I worry about that. Many are pointing at the ask in this proposal for all UUs to actively participate in the covenant, not just the member congregations. To me, this seems pretty evident. Nobody's required to accept every position, just as no UU was required to accept each principle. But in good faith, we should forge these agreements with our own personal commitments. And after all, if we put it in the name of our congregations is us. It sounds like an attempt to limit congregational autonomy, which is a sacred cow to many UUs, but that's covered in other sections of the bylaws, and it's not really affected by this piece. I am one that felt the original principles did provide a little too much emphasis on the individual, grounded in the ideas of the Enlightenment period of social thought. There was a time, not very long ago, where these notions were revolutionary to be held by a religious group, particularly the notion of a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Individual rights are important, but I don't see them as central to forming and building religious community. We need guidances that can help us learn to cooperate, that give us a lead in how to share with each other and how to build. So I think my position seems to be moving towards accepting this proposed set of changes. I see a lot to like and much to work with in these values. And if I were called to make a prediction about how the UUA will vote, my guess is this Article 2 will not be accepted. But we'll have to see. I think that the current 7 principles are deeply entrenched in our understanding and practice of UU faith. And in that, they served us well. They've given us a baseline position that we could use as a safe and trusted point of reference in the moral and ethical world. But maybe it's time to move forward. We need tools that can help us grow into the unknowns of the 21st century, where we hope to be building a movement. We need to differentiate ourselves from the need to differentiate ourselves from other religions is no longer how we need to find our identity. It is in creating our own way forward in this very confusing and unsettled world. I think a value-based approach might help serve this need. If you disagree, I want to hear it. I'm not firm or resolute in my position. If this proposal goes down, as I expected it might, I believe that I will continue to function comfortably with the principles and sources as they now exist. In any rate, whatever changes here, I doubt that it will have much influence on our week-to-week congregational life here. So we can continue, and may we go forward. And with that, I will stop. This discussion now is open. You guys have the documents. You can look at them and think about them. I'm going to skip the last hymn, which I threw in because it's interesting because it was commissioned for the merger of Unitarian and Universalism. As Tranquil Streams, number 145. We'll sing it soon.